The mainstream media is in love with the Kamala Harris-Tim Walz ticket, even though Harris has yet to do a major interview with a journalistic outlet. Amazing. President Biden did, however, submit himself to scrutiny from an interview a few days ago with CBS, and it did not go particularly well at all, raising the question of whether Biden is capable of making it through to the rest of his term and finishing it out. In a recent column for The Hill, Steve Krakauer wonders if this year's October surprise would in fact be Biden dropping out of the presidency and clearing the way for President Harris a bit early. Steve Krakauer, producer of The Megyn Kelly Show, News Nation contributor, and Hill columnist, joins us now.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being with us. So, you pay close attention to the tone of the media coverage of presidential politics, same as I do. I've found it just fascinating how the switch from the incredibly critical of Biden to the point where they, played a strong role in forcing him to drop out of the presidential race to this coverage of Harris Walz that is like Obama reminiscent in how favorable it is, without her actually, doing much to play ball with the media. She's not in conversation with them. She's not putting out policies. She's changed her mind about things via representatives speaking on her behalf. And yet she still commands their loyalty.
Oh yeah, compare it to Obama in 2007, 2008. At least it was a much more substantive reason for them to go all in on Obama. I mean, he was completely compelling. He was the new thing. I mean, this is much more vibes based than that was. The coverage is the same, but it's they're trying a whole lot harder to make it happen here. And I think, I write a lot about media bias, and I'm critical of the corporate media in a lot of areas. And a lot of times it's very subtle. The things that are going on. I think you mentioned that Biden interview with CBS. I think that's a really interesting case of subtle media bias that we see. This is the way they have covered the Democratic side of the ticket during let's say the last 2 months has been one of the more blatant, not subtle at all, versions of media bias that we've seen. I mean, they were telling us that Biden is the best Biden ever, all the way up until that debate at the end of June. And then from that debate for about the next 4 weeks, it was a complete pressure campaign used with reputational blackmail, both from the Pelosi side of the political establishment and the media themselves, to push Joe Biden out of the race because they believed he could not win. So that was a huge switch. And then now they've installed Kamala Harris, anointed her to the top of the ticket, and it is pure, just fawning, ridiculous, over-the-top coverage that I will say we're just starting to see cracks a little bit. I think the media is starting to feel a little bit like, hey, maybe sit with us for an interview. We'll be easy on you. And they still refuse to do it. She said, oh, maybe the end of the month. There's reports that maybe it'll be after Labor Day. I mean, this is completely absurd. But so far, they've gone completely all in on Kamala Harris, all in the service of making sure that Donald Trump does not get a second term.
Speaking of Joe Biden, I thought his, performance in that interview he did with CBS was real bad. Maybe, by the standards he'd set recently, it was not some kind of new low is maybe the best thing you could say about it. I read your column you wrote for The Hill. Do you think he makes it through the rest of this presidency? He's only got a couple of months to go. But the decline he has suffered, I think really in the last 6 months is when it kicked into high gear. And it's sad to talk about. We've all had elderly people in our lives kind of round this corner, and it's not, I frankly feel bad, even though I don't agree with any of his policies and don't really appreciate his presidency. I feel bad for him, and it's hard to watch someone go through this while still be in a position to have the most important job on planet Earth and be expected to perform it at this time of economic crisis and foreign policy crises and all of that. Can he make it?
Yeah, it's sad for Biden. It's sad for the country, honestly. And I think that the truth of it is that Joe Biden has had suffered a massive cognitive decline over the course of years. And I'm not so sure there's anything really significantly, substantively different now than there was 2 months ago or 6 months ago. I think that this is who he is now. And the question is, I think of what happens next, which I lay out in the column in The Hill, is really how he's going to be used. He is essentially being used by the political establishment on the left. At first, it was a conduit to win in 2024. Who knows what would have happened if the debate never really went down the way it did, if it never happened at all, and he won. I'm not so sure he would have lasted more than a few months in the presidency at that point before he was swapped out for Kamala Harris anyway. But then after that, he was used to be pushed aside. Okay, you can stay as president, but Kamala will be running now in 2024. And yes, as I lay out, I believe that there is absolutely a scenario where if it continues to be close, and there's been a huge wave, and Kamala Harris has gotten a huge amount of momentum, but this is a very close election still. In the key swing states, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, that are going to really determine what happens in November. This is neck and neck. And so if it's continuing down that path, wait until after September 10th at the debate, because I think that if Kamala is a little bit shaky there, if Trump performs well like he did in that first debate with Biden, I think you're going to see calls for Kamala Harris to be installed as the president, to run as the incumbent in October, leading into November. Let her have a mini crisis, whether manufactured or real, to show that she is strong and powerful and is up for the job, and Biden just gets pushed aside. I think that's a very real possibility here, and I think that's a shoe that is still yet to drop in this crazy chaotic year that I think is a very real possibility that we might be faced with.
I mean, it would be entirely characteristic of Kamala Harris's rise for her to just, yes, be installed as president that way. She was installed as the candidate via that means. The Democratic elite, donors, media people picked her. And so she was able to completely avoid the primary process, doing debates with other Democrats, maybe to her advantage, frankly. There's something to this where she's not had to alienate any part of the progressive coalition, even though I suspect her policies on, for instance, Israel are going to prove just as divisive to young left-leaning people as her boss, Joe Biden. I mean, she's part of the administration who's done it. Is she going to break from them? I don't expect it. But she hasn't had to say anything about it. We don't know what version of her is even running or what her policies are. And she's been allowed to get away with that.
Yeah, and Robbie, I mean, I think the Kamala coronation that's going to be happening next week in Chicago at the DNC is going to be one to watch. But I think that we've already started to see a little bit of what may be happening as well outside, which is the protests. And there is going to be major efforts, I think, to not just allow this to happen, mainly from the progressive side of the left. But I will say, it's so funny. I saw a post on X from Ben Smith of Semaphore yesterday talking about how this is a new model for how we should be doing elections. Really condensed. And he did mention, okay, maybe we condense all the primaries right before the convention so it can kind of lead up to it. But this is a new model. It's great for Kamala Harris because it involved zero scrutiny. It allows her to really take her time when it comes to, and I'm being very kind about it, take her time when it comes to announcing what her policies are. Her website, which has been in existence now for nearly a month, has no policies on it at all. And you can buy lots of merch. You can buy the camo hat, but you can't find out what she actually believes on things. We're just going to start to learn about that maybe tomorrow and certainly during the convention. But yeah, this is a way for a candidate to escape scrutiny, both from her own side and from the media. And as of now, we have not seen a lot of media pushback to this idea at all. They've been right along for the rise.
Continuing my conversation with Steve Krakauer, producer of The Megyn Kelly Show, a contributor to News Nation, and a columnist for The Hill. We were talking about media coverage, how Kamala Harris has been allowed to get away with a lot in her coronation effort in recent weeks. Let's talk a little bit about the Republican side, because it is the case that Donald Trump also basically chose not to participate in the Republican primary process. He was a candidate in the primaries, but he didn't do the debates. He acted as if it was his, and that worked, and he got it. So, more power to him. He's also, not to the same degree as Kamala, but to some degree been allowed to be evasive on what particularly he would do differently, especially in terms of foreign policy. He'll make statements like, well, yeah, this would have never happened if I was president. But then, well, why would it have never happened? Just, through sheer force of your magnetic powers. He hasn't been pressed, and attempts to press him to be more specific on how he would address some of those problems have not panned out well.
It's all strategy. It's strategy on the right. It's strategy on the left. And I think one of the great reports I saw leading up to the Republican convention was about how personally involved Donald Trump was in the Republican position, in the platform that they decided. Now, he kind of walked in the room and he said, no, delete all of this. Let's get rid of all this. Let's make it essentially make it vague, make it vague, make it very soaring rhetoric and
Project
not a lot of
2025, I
specifics.
don't know her.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Look, there's a strategy behind that for sure. And I think that at the same time, we also have seen Donald Trump say things. I mean, look, he's a showman. He's a marketing genius. He came up with this idea, and he actually explained it in a really interesting way. This no tax on tips, which he explained at the Republican convention. He came up not through a bunch of high paid consultants, but by talking to a waitress in Vegas who said, I'm really getting hurt by these taxes on my tips. And he's like, "What are you talking about? Hey, no tax on tips. How did that sound?" Well, and then all of a sudden, Kamala Harris just takes it. So there's a strategic nature, I think, to both these campaigns and to what they're putting out there. What is going to kind of navigate these waters in a very weird election year. I mean, this is unlike any other election year. We've got Trump trials going on. He's going to be up for potentially going to jail next month. I mean, it is totally weird. But that I think they're both sides are trying to figure out how do we navigate the media landscape and how do we navigate the political and cultural landscape and obviously try to win what will be a very close election in November.
There's been a lot of focus on the VP candidates, I think for a variety of reasons. One being, what new thing can you say about Donald Trump? Everybody's minds, you think, are very made up at least. Nothing scandalous about him turns any of his supporters off. Nothing potentially good about him wins him any praise from the other side. What more can you say? Kamala is, again, a question mark because we don't really know what her views are, what her ideology is, what version of her is running or would serve as president. But then in Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, you do have two figures who have, I think, perhaps more sincere ideological commitments or a background of putting those into practice. J.D. Vance, obviously a very ideological leader of the new right populism kind of philosophy, has been very active on podcasts and cable news and has a record as a senator and has something he stands for and believes in. Tim Walz was governor of a state and shepherded that state through the pandemic, through various crises in a way that policies I don't think were good, but make the left very happy. And so they've almost become more of the focal points because Kamala Harris is an enigma and Donald Trump is in some ways old news by now.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And they're very different. There's so much to say about it. I think the JD Vance story is just fascinating to me. And I think you're 100% right. He's someone who I think has pretty defined and strong ideological positions in contrast to Donald Trump, let's just say, who is kind of more of a vibes based, okay, what's going to be popular? How do we kind of make this vague? JD Vance seems to come from a very strong place of conviction. Which is actually a criticism that he's gotten from other people. Like I was listening to a podcast of Don Lemon interviewing Sophia Nelson, JD Vance's former friend, who's been on a bit of a media tour, saying, "Oh, he's a chameleon. He changes his point." I'm not sure that's true. I mean, he is someone who was a friend of yours and now has positions that you don't like, but he's not really changing his positions in a lot of ways. And I wrote in The Hill about a month before JD Vance was picked as the VP nominee why I thought he would be picked. And the reason actually is a little bit aligned with why Donald Trump, I thought, was such a phenomenon back in 2016, which is that JD Vance is a class traitor. And he is someone who became massively famous. I'm reading Hillbilly Elegy right now for the first time, and I think it's a great book. And in the front of Hillbilly Elegy, which has now been reprinted so many times and sold millions of copies, is Vogue, and it's In Touch Weekly, and it's People Magazine, and it's Rolling Stone. Everyone talking about how amazing this story and how amazing this book is and how amazing JD Vance is. This is a guy who was on Joy Reid's show on MSNBC and was a CNN contributor and a New York Times columnist back in 2016 and 2017. And then something happened. And the thing that happened is the thing that the media hates more than anything. It's that he became a little bit more aligned with Donald Trump. And this is long before he even ran for Senate. He became someone who both felt strongly about the community that he came from, and had policies that they strongly disagreed with. And I think that he comes across as authentic, and they hate that. I really do believe that's at the core of it, is personal. It's not just about even political
Yeah.
with JD Vance. He was part of them, and then he turned against them. And so I think that's fascinating. And then you're right, Tim Walz, yeah, has a very fascinating story as well. He's the coach. We keep hearing about he's the coach. I mean, he was a defensive coordinator, football coach, but at a high school. But yes, okay, he's got a coach, and he's folksy, and he's got the camo. And there's a certain authenticity, I think, that resonates with people on the left as well.
Yeah. So on JD Vance, so he's evolved. I would like, it's not a flip. He's just changed over time
Yeah.
some of his views, which is something that happens to a lot of people. He had strongly held views. He has strongly held views now. He changed. So I've read Hillbilly Elegy. I guess where I would criticize him is in the. I thought the book was great. I really did like the book. In the book, I think he has a more balanced view of exactly what has gone wrong in his community, where it's not just that, oh, outsourcing and all of that kind of stuff. It's also, well, these communities needed to adapt and didn't adapt. He's somewhat condemning of his friends and relatives for not changing with the times, and now it's all somebody else's fault. It's never your own failure to deal with a changing world. It's always blaming some other adversary. It's not responsible for your problems.
Yeah, I've heard that criticism also, but I don't see it as condemning. I do think that you're right. It was a very nuanced portrayal of the people of his communities. Some people were really hurt by the system, and I think that he has a view that is completely different, let's say, from the Bush years of what conservatives
Yes.
and the Republican Party used to be for the prescriptions for how to fix that. But I also think, yes, I think that it was nuanced in the sense of there is a personal responsibility there. And he cares for these people, but it's not just the system, that it's also the individuals that make it up. And I've listened to a lot of podcasts with him now, both the ones that he's doing right now and the ones that he did back when this was all going on before he became a politician. I think the least interesting years of JD Vance are 2021, when he started running for Senate, to about
Yeah.
2023 as a senator before he became kind of a VP nominee. I think the time before it and the time right now are very interesting. I think that part is a little bit less interesting. And I think that what's resonant for back then and what's resonant now is that he comes across as authentic. And he has been asked about that. He was asked about that in interviews like with CBS and others, about, are you being critical of the people that you grew up with, that you love? And he's saying, I love those people, but I'm just trying to be honest. I'm trying to give a real honest assessment of it. And I do think that resonates with people. People aren't going to love it. Not everyone's going to connect with it in that way, but there's something real about it. And I think that real is you can't manufacture it. You can't just have it as a vibe. What they're trying to make certain things happen with, let's say, Kamala Harris, there's not a realness to it. But I think with JD Vance, it's real, and I think that some people like it, some people don't. But you can't argue that it's fake.
How seriously should we take the criticism, mostly from conservative media, of Tim Walz's military, suggesting that he had been in war? I considered it an exaggeration, not maybe the most serious exaggeration ever, and something politicians are very accustomed to doing. Everyone, including media reporters, have exaggerated what level of danger they've been in when they visited the Middle East. I certainly think he implied that he had, carried weapons in actual combat. And then, the idea that he retired just before his unit was going to be deployed to Iraq is potentially a more serious thing, although no one is, obligated to obviously go fight, in my view, in a war that they don't support. And he had a long history of military service, and it was perfectly fine for him to retire and run for Congress. Do you think these criticisms from conservative media are going to, resonate anywhere outside of right-wing world?
I think that the direct criticism of his military record, of quote unquote stolen valor, is a pretty contained one and is not really a direct hit, I would say.
Yeah.
I think what it does imply, though, is that it is part of a pattern, and it goes beyond just his military record. There was a story that's now being bubbled up. The Daily Beast and CNN have done some reporting this week on it, about his DUI or his DWI back in 1995, when he was caught just going 90 miles an hour and was drunk. And then when he ran for Congress, in multiple instances played this down. Oh no, he wasn't really drunk. He actually drove himself to the police station. They spun it in a different way. And this is someone who was a first-time politician back in 2006. And really, even if you look at what's going on and what he said publicly, 2020, 2021, he's a fairly unknown quantity. He's a guy, yes, he's the governor of Minnesota, but no one's really paying attention to the ins and outs, the intricacies of what Tim Walz is saying. And so I think there's a casualness to it. It's not, I wouldn't say it's lying. I wouldn't say it's even necessarily that he is actively going out there and trying to spin a story that's not true. But I do think that there is an exaggeration that we're seeing in a lot of different areas. The coach, he's the coach. Well, he was a defensive coordinator of a high school football team. Can you even call yourself the coach? So I think that there's just especially when it comes to the personal story that he's told, that he never really got the scrutiny that he would be getting right now. And now that because of this massively fast vetting process that they had to do because of the way Kamala Harris was installed, I think that there a lot of these little stories are coming to light, and they become part of a pattern potentially that could make people say, is this person just like legitimate, or because of the way that they've told their story in the past?
Steve Krakauer, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.